Hi everyone, Stepan here. I'm going to continue covering games from the Serbia Chess Open. In round 6 I faced a strong opponent from Kazakhstan, and I have to say I never want something like this to happen again. I mean, inevitably it's going to, but it felt really bad, and well, you're going to see. So my opponent plays different Reti King's Indian attack systems. He played knight f3 on move 1. I went d5, g3, knight f6. We have the same position like in the previous game that you could have seen yesterday. Pawn to c6, d3, bishop to f5. Needless to say that I've studied the mistakes I'd made in the previous game, the game I played the day before, so I was prepared for the setup I played in round 5. My opponent played something different though. Okay, he castled, I played pawn to e6, still the same position, and now we have knight to h4. And here I knew that the best move is bishop to g4, followed by h3, bishop h5, queen e1, bishop e7, f4, and then after knight f to d7, the knight goes back to f3, and bishop f3, bishop f3. And this position, even though it's slightly simplified, I got rid of my bad bishop, so to speak, is very hard to play for black. And most of the games that I've analyzed did not go well for black, even though black scores equal. Well, the scores are kind of equal, but I find this unpleasant. So I played bishop to g6, which is fine. Knight g6, pawn takes g6, and here he surprised me. Usually people play knight to d2 here, but he played c4 straight away. Okay, now I don't want to take, so I played knight b to d7, and he took. And here's where I found myself in a completely unfamiliar position, actually unsure which pawn to take with. I don't want to take with the knight, allowing a free e4 with tempo, so I either have to take with the e pawn or with the c pawn. Ended up taking with the e pawn, giving myself or making the structure non-symmetrical. I think taking with the c pawn is fine. If I take with the c pawn, he plays e4, take it, takes, and probably continue bishop c5 or bishop e7 and castle. If this pawn ever gets to e5, I could lose a pawn, but I don't think that's such a big deal because the e5 pawn is weak as well. Instead of that, I continued ed to make sure I don't have that many issues along this diagonal. Of course, he plays e4, I take it, he takes it. And here, the position is tricky. e5 could be coming very quickly. If I don't do anything, then e5 and rook e1, and my king is still in the center. So this is already very dangerous for black. The engine gives it as equal, but it's much easier for white to play. The bishop on g2 is great. The pieces could come into play naturally. Most importantly, black's king is stuck on e8, and I could get mated, or well, I could be in trouble if the rook gets to e1. Okay, so the best move here, which I did not play, is bishop to c5. Makes sense, but I was afraid of e5. And according to the engine, black should continue bishop f4, which seems strange, and I should continue queen to e7, e5, knight h5. So, not many issues really. The point is, after e5 you don't take it, so you're fine. Instead of that, I played knight to b6. The idea behind knight b6 is I want to have double control over d5 to make sure that, firstly, I don't lose a pawn, secondly, I keep a piece on d5, I don't want to have an isolated pawn. So, for example, if he makes a mistake with e5 here, then this position is perfect. Black is just better here, and I have tremendous control over d5. I'm going to play bishop c5. I don't even have to castle king side, I could castle queen side, keep this rook on the h file. But after knight b6, he declined the queen trade. I wouldn't have taken the queen anyway, but he played queen c2. I played bishop to e7, he went knight c3, and here I started thinking, well, I was already thinking a long time before knight b6, but here I'd really spent my time, and I was unsure what setup to go for. Of course, rook to d1 is coming at some point, so I played queen to d7. wanting to meet rook d1, as was played in the game, with queen to e6. My queen is just good on e6, preventing e5 for the moment, controlling the entire board, preventing bishop to h3, after I castle, of course, and I was happy with this. Okay, he played knight e2, the knight is coming to f4, which is logical. I castled. He played b3 first. I went rook a to d8, bishop to b2, and I exchanged everything because his pieces are more active, so we traded rooks. Okay, and knight to f4. And here I played queen e8. I mean, I'm not hanging on g6 yet, but for example, if queen e7, in some positions he could play e5 and knight d5 and then knight g6. It's not scary now, it just loses a piece, but in conjunction with e6 it could be scary. So I just decided to keep my queen on e8. It's not blocking my bishop. Also is defending g6. Also, after his next move, which I'd anticipated, queen c3, I really want to get my bishop to f8. Firstly, it's better on this diagonal. Secondly, g7 is not hanging, meaning that e5 is not scary, followed by e6, and I'm not getting mated on g7. Queen d7, I took the open file. He played knight to d3, and I went bishop to e7. I'm really afraid of e5, e6, so I don't want to get mated or lose a piece. h4, bishop f8. Now it's safe. And, of course, white should be better here, because white has the bishop pair, he has the more active pieces, he has more space because of the e4 pawn. But I don't think it's much better, because the e4 pawn is blocking in his bishop, the other diagonals are sort of taken, bishop f1 could be played, but I don't think it's that good. And my knights are okay. Okay, he played bishop to f3, which I'm not sure I understand. I don't know why he played bishop f3. Maybe he wants to start advancing with g4, but it's still defended for now. Maybe in the future he wants to play h5, but I'm not sure he should be playing for h5 because it gets rid of my doubled pawn. But anyway, he played bishop to f3, which at least allows king to g2. And here I played a weird move, which I was unhappy with. I played queen e7. The idea behind queen e7 was to bishop a3, which is still prevented, but also to prevent knight c5, which is now defended twice, and also to prevent queen b4 if my bishop should move, but mainly to prevent knight c5. Okay, he went queen e5, offering a rook trade. I declined. He went queen d4, offering a rook trade, a queen trade again. And here I could go back, but his queen is better on d4 than on c3. He has the d file, so I traded. So queen d4, bishop d4. I played bishop e7, now there's no more mate threats, and I can... Sorry, I'm in a house with some friends, so they are walking around. Okay, so I went bishop e7, because I want to get my bishop to f6, activate my pieces. The bishop is not needed on f8 anymore, because g7 is not threatened. Okay, he went knight c5, I have to take this. So bishop c5, and knight f to d7. I want to go knight f to d7 instead of knight b to d7, because the pawn on a7 is hanging. Also, in the future, I want to play f6 to make sure his bishop is slightly more restricted, and that I have the e5 square. Bishop d4, f6. He went bishop e2, which makes sense. Maybe he should have played bishop d1, getting the bishop to c2, because g6 is weak. But fine, king f7 and g6 is defended anyway. Pawn to f4, advancing. Pawn a6, freeing up my b6 knight. And king to f2. In this position, I had a long think, and I basically need to anticipate e5, and I need to blockade his passed e4 pawn, e5 pawn, once this trade happens with my knight. So basically I need to play knight f8, knight e6 at some point. The other knight could be coming to e7, could be coming to d6, depending on what he does. So I went knight c8, which is flexible. King e3, knight d6, looking at the e pawn, but also looking at the b5 square, also looking at the e8 square. Maybe if this pawn gets traded off, I could jump into f6 as well. g4, which is fine. c5, finally getting some space on the queen side. And what's very important in this position, even though he has the bishop pair, all the pawns on the king side and on the queen side sort of restrict his bishops and make my knights more potent. So after c5, he needs to go back, bishop b2, and now b5. And if you look at his bishops, they don't really have that many good squares, and my knights are fine. Okay, he went e5 finally, and now knight to e8. I don't want to take yet. If he wishes to take, that's fine, but I really don't want these pawns to be doubled. King e4, fine. And in this position I blundered, and this is the first serious blunder of the game, which I'm not really sure how white should have exploited. I went knight c7, and in this position the engine thinks ef and gf and f5 is good, which makes sense, because if I take gf5, king f5, then he has a passed pawn on the h-file, which will be hard to stop, but this bishop is at least still blocked, so he's going to have to trade off another pawn. And if I can manage to sacrifice my knight for the h-pawn, maybe I can draw this 3-on-2 with a knight against two bishops, maybe, if I manage to trade off all the pawns. Anyway, this is what the engine thinks, how white should punish my knight c7 move. Instead of knight c7, I need to go king e6, which basically prevents him from playing f5, or trading, playing f5, and then taking with the king. Because if he has to take with the pawn, this is fine. I just have to stop this one, and it's okay. Okay, but I went knight c7. He did not play what he was supposed to play, ef. In fact, he went h5, and after this the position is a draw. Why is the position a draw? He's trading off another pawn. The pawns on the e-file are inevitably going to get traded off, and if I can do what I did in the game, gh, and fe, now these two pawns nullify each other, these three pawns nullify these two, and all I have to do is blockade the e5 pawn, and it should be a draw. Of course, any endgame two bishops versus two knights is a draw, without the pawns on the board. Any endgame two bishops versus one knight is a draw without pawns on the board, so that was fine. And now finally knight f8, knight e6, starting the blockade. Bishop c1, knight fe6, and this position is perfectly safe. The following moves are completely, well, meaningless, my following moves, because I have no way to improve my position. What I have to do is I have to make sure that the king is not entering the d5 square, because if the king gets in here, then I lose. If the king doesn't get into b7, then it's simply a draw. So he shuffled his bishops. I just played king f7, king e7. Nothing's happening. He went a4, which actually simplifies my game, and actually took on b5. Another pawn got traded off. This is now 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. The problem is, for about 20 or so moves, I was in time trouble, and at this point I played on increment, and I have no time on the clock. It's a game in 90 plus a 30-second increment per move. We'd already passed move 40, after which you get an extra 15 minutes, but I'd already spent that time somehow, or I was very close to spending it. He went bishop a5, king e7, b4, and another pawn got traded off. And I mean, all I have to do is sacrifice both of my knights for both of his pawns, or excuse me, one of my knights for one of his pawns, and I'll probably draw. Yeah, I don't know what to say. You're going to see, you're probably going to laugh, you're probably going to cry, I have no idea. Okay, so bishop d6, king e8, I do nothing because there's nothing I can do. Bishop d3, king f7, bishop b1, king g8, king f5, king h7, king g4 check, king g8, bishop g6. May look scary, but it's really not scary. There's nothing he can do. Knight a6, knight c7, bishop g6, knight a6, king f3, knight ac5, king e3, b4, king d2. There's no way for him to make progress. I just wait, king e3, king g8, bishop f5, threatening to take the knight. Now I could, of course, play pawn to b3 to make sure that this... excuse me. I couldn't play pawn to b3 because... yeah, I actually could, but I didn't want to. This was just simpler. After bishop to f5, I just went king f7, giving up this pawn because it's irrelevant. So bishop e6, knight e6, bishop takes b4, and the simplest draw in the world. Okay, the simplest way to draw this position is to play g6. Of course, he has to play h6, and now I just go g5. And that's it. I go king g6, king d5, knight f4, take the pawn. For example, king e4 takes here, I don't know, king f5, and then I can just do this. and take the pawn on the next turn. So for example here. Draw agreed. Instead of that I went knight c7, which is not bad, but it's not as simple. Of course I was playing on increment. He went bishop d6, and now I made a move after which the position is so lost and I can resign, and I knew it as soon as I played it. I don't know what to say. What I have to do here is go knight e6, and then again, after, for example, king f3, just go here, here, and take it, and draw. Instead of that, I went knight e8. The problem with knight e8 is that my knight has no squares. I'm basically in Zugzwang with the knight, pawn, and king on the board. He went king f4. If I could play g5, that would be fine. Unfortunately, he doesn't take en passant, he takes with the king. That's lost. So after king f4, I went king e6. All he has to do is wait. King g5, king f7, king f5, Zugzwang, king g8, king g6, king h8, king f7. Game over. So yeah, I mean, and what's worst, after the game, so we signed the score sheets, and he points to the e8 square and says, "Very bad. This is very bad." I was so upset when he said that. I mean, I know that it's bad. I'm not an idiot. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's probably the worst move I've played in the last 20 games or so. It's an inexplicable mistake, but I think I deserved the draw because I defended well. But if I make moves like knight e8, then I should lose all of my games until I stop doing that. So, yeah. Anyway, this was a painful game. I'm going to continue with the next round tomorrow. Hope you got something from the video. Hope you don't mess up in the opening like I did. This position should not be happening. Just a second. What we had on the board after knight bd7 and cd5. I mean, I should not have positions on move 9 in which I'm unsure which pawn to take with. Even though he was the one who sort of played the rare move. So yeah, stuff like that should not be happening. Anyway, hope that you at least got a laugh out of this. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow. Bye bye.